Latest news on the 49ers in the NFC West. Is there a quarterback shakeup? Matthew Stafford potentially on his way out of the division. Daniel Jeremiah chimes in on the 49ers draft. Sounds familiar there. All that and more coming up on today's Locked On 49ers.
You are Locked On 49ers, your daily San Francisco 49ers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On 49ers. Brian Peacock and Eric Crocker at BD Peacock at Crocky209. Thanks everybody for making us your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Love our everydayers. Let us know you stop by. Hit the thumbs up. Know you're already subscribed. And if you're new to the program, subscribe on YouTube or wherever you are listening to this podcast. So you can hang out with us every day as we break down the Niners, all the latest news, trades that are coming, and of course, NFL draft. Today's episode of Locked On 49ers is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just go to FanDuel.com to get started. All right, I want to start with a story that isn't about the 49ers, but it relates to the 49ers for two reasons. One, because the 49ers, their strongest rival last year was the Los Angeles Rams. And the best quarterback, in my opinion, in the division is Matthew Stafford. And, some Brock Purdy fans, some 49ers fans will argue with me with that. But some Cardinals fans, and I've talked to them, they still think Kyler is the guy. And they would rank Brock Purdy like third in the division. Seahawks fans think that they've got a guy and he's better than, the other guys. So it's an interesting quarterback division, but one of them might be on their way out in Matthew Stafford, Croc. And what's interesting to me about this, not only that it could affect the NFC West and what the Rams are doing, and the Rams were the closest team to beating the Philadelphia Eagles in the playoffs, by the way. And so they would be kind of starting over at quarterback, or at least really making a major change in the middle of a team that is kind of back on the way up after coming down for a few years. But the Rams are doing something that I've talked about maybe the 49ers should do with Brock Purdy, and that's allow him to find his market value. So this is fascinating to me, Croc, and I'm going to relay the information that Tom Pelissero of NFL.com put out there on the Rich Eisen show this week.
Real quick, Peacock, before you get into that, market value, because I continue to see this on social media, but you said something in a previous podcast, and I felt like it's not said enough. We never get to truly see what a quarterback's true market value is. And the only way to find out is to kind of put a quarterback out there and see what teams are willing to potentially give that quarterback before you make your decision on the QB. So whether it's a quarterback or any other position, we typically don't see that. So now you can go into this, but I just wanted to kind of elaborate on that a little bit.
None of these guys, like all these comps for Brock Purdy, what's his contract going to look like? Well, market value is this $1 million. That's not market value because none of those guys saw the market. Right. So we don't know what the market value is. And it's weird because quarterbacks, or certain quarterbacks, I think, might actually, because usually market value means that price goes up. You become a free agent, you have all these teams bidding on you, and the price goes up for your services because you have multiple teams bidding on you and someone's willing to go kind of crazy on that. And that is still possible with these quarterbacks. But with the money where quarterbacks are getting, because look, a Brock Purdy contract might be twice as much guaranteed money as the biggest contract that the franchise has ever done, which is Nick Bosa to this point. The guaranteed money might be twice that for Brock Purdy. That's how big this contract potentially is for Brock Purdy. And how many teams are going to pay Brock Purdy, whatever the $55-60 million range, and maybe there's some teams that are willing to do it, but I don't think if you're going to go to the top of where the market is, apparently, the quote unquote market is for some of these quarterbacks, if you're already going straight to the top anyway, then why not find out if that's really where it is with other teams? And so I think certain quarterbacks, actually, the market value could actually is lower if you didn't negotiate against yourself versus other positions where it would absolutely go up. Some quarterbacks, Josh Allen would get $100 million a year if he was on the open market, right? I don't think Brock Purdy would get that. I don't think Matthew Stafford will get that, partly because of his age. But according to Tom Pelissero, and you can see the video on the Rich Eisen show, Tom Pelissero said essentially what's going on with this story of Matthew Stafford. Could he really be traded? And the answer is kind of maybe. And essentially what the Rams are doing is what I've talked about. Maybe the 49ers should do with Brock Purdy, mostly to get the deal done sooner. Instead of going through this and having contract talks into the summer and having holdouts and having, some trade conversations all of a sudden happening in August. Instead, we're big boys. Put your big boy pants on. Say, look, okay, we're this far apart or whatever. We're allowing you to go talk to teams, find out what market value is, And if you get some team that's got crazy, like way higher valuation on you than we do, and they're willing to bring back the picks that it should cost for a $60 million quarterback, which is like first round picks, plural, then we'll have that conversation too, right? But nobody's willing to look behind door number 2 at quarterback, and the Rams are. And the Rams kind of do things a little bit differently, Croc. And according to Tom Pelissero, the Rams have allowed Matthew Stafford to seek a trade because he's making only $27 million per year, which is a lot of money. But for NFL quarterbacks these days, that market has skyrocketed, really. And a lot of quarterbacks are making a lot. And Matthew Stafford's looking at that and saying, well, I need a new deal. And so the Rams and Stafford are kind of trying to.
They're making double what he's making this year. Like, that's pretty extreme, especially when you look at the quarterbacks that are getting paid double what he's making. When you look at the Jordan Love, the Tua, Trevor Lawrence, like all these guys, it's like, how are these guys making double what I'm making? I lead my team to the postseason every year. We don't have a great roster, but I figure it out. I brought this team a Super Bowl, and these guys are making double. I would want to renegotiate that contract as well.
Yeah, and if you're Stafford, you're like, well, I'm better than those guys we've today. Like, he's 37 years old or whatever. He's, still not going to be a 6-year contract or anything, but today, right now, he's better than a lot of those guys we mentioned, right? And so it makes sense that he wants a new deal, and the Rams are willing to let him go find that deal and find out what his market value really is. And I think there's a good chance he still comes back to the Rams after he finds out and everyone finds out what that number is. But the Rams have allowed him to go seek a trade, which essentially means go find your market value. And then they'll deal with any trade offers that come with that if they can't come to a deal. I think he's going to still end up with the Rams, but there's a chance that there's a desperate team out there like the New York Giants who throw a lot in trade and they're going to get fired if they don't do something to quarterback. And so maybe a team throws enough out there in trade in dollars to make it make sense for Matthew Stafford and to make it make sense for the Rams. I think it's still unlikely, but it is a possibility. But I'm kind of glad that we're seeing a team do that. And I respect the Rams for having the guts to actually take a peek behind door number 2. Now, it's a 37-year-old quarterback, so it's not like this is going to burn them in 5 years or anything like that if they did trade Matthew Stafford away. But there's a chance they step back and it hurts them in the short term, for sure.
Yeah. There is one team that did this at a different position, and that position was defensive tackle, specifically more of a 3-tech, and that was the 49ers with DeForest Buckner. And a lot of people weren't happy about that, but Buckner and his camp, they wanted a certain amount of money. They felt like he was worth a certain amount. 49ers said, we're not going to pay you that. Go ahead and seek a trade. And he went out there, and there was a team that was like, hey, we'll not only pay you that, we'll give the 49ers the number 13 overall pick. And the 49ers are like, well, we could either pay him, match it, or trade him, get that money off the books. We can sign a couple of other players. It was Jimmy Ward. It was Eric Armstead and a couple guys, right? And also, we can draft a player at pick 13, which ultimately they trade back, pick 14. But at least you see what your options are. And I would 100% do that with Brock Purdy. And that would not be to disgruntle Purdy. That would not be I wouldn't be doing it with intentions to not pay him. It would be with the intentions of, all right, I want to pay you, Brock, but let's see what other teams will be willing to pay you as well. And if somebody comes in astronomically high and it's like, that's ridiculous, but you guys are willing to give me 2 first-round picks, well, guess what? All right, Brock, like I love you, but we're not going to pay you $65 million a year, when we can trade you away and get these 2 first-round picks. Now, I'm not saying that's the right way to do it, but at least you'll know what your options are. Okay, they're willing to pay you 65. All right, we'll go 65 and lock you in for the long haul. Now you're our quarterback, but at least we found out what other teams are willing to pay you.
Yeah,
I think there's going to be a lot of conversations, not just if he was available or whatnot, but the conversation will be, what is he without having as extreme of a good roster that he had in 2022, 2023. Teams are going to have to look in the mirror and say, well, do we have that same supporting cast to give him? I think for us, a conversation with the 49ers, do the 49ers still have that same supporting cast to give him? And I think for most teams, the answer would be no. So I would be curious to see how they feel about paying him, like other teams, what they would come in at, what number that would be. But I do like the way that the Rams are going about this because at the very least, you see, and I know for me, instead of just throwing Brock money, if you saw what he was worth and everything, and you came back and you're like, you know what, all right, we'll pay you that, we'll match that, I would feel more comfortable with that. Now, it's not my money, but I'm just saying if I were the one running the team, that would be more the way I felt comfortable going about the situation. And if the team's willing to pay him, guess what? Okay, we'll pay him what these teams are saying that he's worth. And I would, as a GM, I would feel much more comfortable doing that as opposed to just saying, oh, we're just going to throw you $60 million because, well, that's what social media says the market is.
Well, right. Well, we're afraid to do anything else. So you have us hostage. We're going to bid against ourselves, and we're just going to pay you whatever number you slide over the table to us. And again, I just want to say this is not about, you're not trying to trade.
Right.
You're not shopping Brock Purdy. What you're doing is trying to find market value so you can get a stinking deal done now and not in August. That's the idea of it.
Now, the only thing that can kind of backfire a little bit, another team kind of did this with the quarterback, it was Baltimore Ravens. And it almost felt like the league knew the Ravens would not let Lamar Jackson go. So there weren't a lot of people highly interested. And that was a scenario in itself. So there could be teams that say, well, you're not going to use us to figure out what he's worth. Like, just spend whatever money you guys feel like he's worth. And teams could do that with Brock Purdy.
All the more reason a shrewd team should do that because it helps them. And it's like, see, told you, nobody was willing to offer that thing, right? That's kind of that's kind of what happens there. So that's even a stronger indication the 49ers should try to do something like that. I doubt the 49ers will go down this road, but I find it fascinating that I've talked about doing this, and now we get to see a team do it. So for sure, I'm 100% interested now in what's going on with the Rams and Matthew Stafford for multiple reasons, and we'll see if they can stick the landing on that one. I want to talk about another trade possibility, which is Debo Samuel. And it sounds like there might be some suitors out there that are at least talking with Deebo and potentially the San Francisco 49ers about a trade, and Daniel Jeremiah chiming in about the 49ers draft next. This episode of Locked On 49ers brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Why are they America's #1 sports book? Well, because they do things like give customers a chance at $150 in extra bonus bets, and all you got to do is win your first $5 bet. And when the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off, you can bet on that fourth quarter comeback. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. And I know the football season is over. We're talking about betting on NBA games. Major League Baseball's getting going. Got the college tournament coming as well, which is all super fun to bet on, but you can still bet on the NFL, bet on those Niners to win the Super Bowl, or bet on NFL draft props, which are super fun. And I think the best way to bet on football all season long is actually in the offseason. And right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So, Croc, the 49ers might swing a deal or two of their own this offseason, and they have allowed Debo Samuel to seek a trade. And according to ESPN's Jeremy Fowler, there have been numerous teams that have been in conversation and have expressed some interest in Debo Samuel, with preliminary talks on a potential trade that could happen between now and March 22nd is one of the dates that could be a little bit of a soft deadline because there's a bonus structure for Debo Samuel in his contract on that date. So we'll see if by basically exactly a month, if Debo Samuel is traded, probably will happen before March 22nd. There's still potential that he could get released, but Deebo is such an interesting case because he's a little different than everybody else at wide receiver. And he's a little bit different player. So I think the trade market for him is a little different as well, because if you're looking for Debo Samuel, you're looking for something specific. And the reason you would trade some pick for Debo Samuel and not say, well, we think if we don't trade for him, then he'll get released. Well, there's going to be enough teams interested in what Debo Samuel can do just because he's such a unique player. There's going to be enough teams interested in Debo Samuel, in my opinion, Croc, that you can't just say, well, we'll sign him or somebody else in free agency, because you're not going to get anything like him if you wait and you don't get him. So the only way to secure Debo Samuel's services and not try to fight other teams for him after he gets cut is to agree to a deal now and trade for him, because then you might not know, unless with these conversations with the agent, you realize, okay, well, we're his first spot, so we're going to be able to sign him. But then again, another team could send more money his way and be like, yeah, you know what? Actually, maybe the New England Patriots sound better than I thought at first, because guess what? They're offering me more money, and I might be willing to go do something like that. So whether it's the Steelers, I think there's a lot of teams that have some wide receiver needs. Debo's different than all the other guys. There's some free agent wide receivers out there. There's, Cooper Kupp, who's available in trade, might also get cut. Debo's different enough. Am I reading this wrong, Croc, that he might be a guy that actually gets a little bit, and look, it's not going to be anything more than a third, fourth rounder, probably something like a fifth rounder if I had to guess, but it's something. Is that enough for the 49ers to trade him and take the accelerated cap hit now rather than spreading it over? Because they're taking the cap hit either way. Take the cap hit now rather than spreading it over 2 years. Is a fifth round pick enough? Could they get a fourth round pick even if there's a few teams that are vying for his services, potentially teams in the same division? Like, let's say the Bengals and the Steelers and the Ravens are all interested in Debo Samuel, and I think they all could be interested in Debo Samuel. Would that raise the ante for someone, and the Steelers say, all right, we'll give you our fourth round pick. Let's get him in here. We'll restructure his contract and figure that stuff out. I do feel like the 49ers could get a draft pick. I don't think it's necessarily going to be high, but he's just a unique player where if you don't get Debo, it's not like you get a different guy to play that role. It's either you get Debo or you get a different wide receiver altogether.
I saw someone post a video on this TCU receiver, and he's like, look, this is a guy that could replace the Debo Samuel role. And one thing we got to remember, like, Debo coming out of college, he was a legit receiver first. And as his career went on, he continued more and more to embrace the white back rule. Now, he did some of that at South Carolina, right? But not to the extent of what we saw at the NFL level, and then what it kind of turned into, which was, well, this is the only way you could use him now. But he is so unique, and he is different than everyone else. So I think the market for him it'll be very interesting to me, because I want to see, like, okay, well, what teams like him and how do they plan on utilizing him? Or maybe Debo, takes this as an opportunity to say, you know what, like, let me look in the mirror real quick, and man, like, the way I have been utilized is kind of diminished a little bit. And, my gameplay, you see it kind of up and down a little bit. Last season had some good games, saw a lot of games where it was like, well, you have 20 yards, 5 yards in the game. But there were a few 100-yard games in there as well. So a lot of ability, and the team may see that and say, you know what, we'll take that, especially if we get an angry Debo Samuel and get the best version of him. What teams would be interested in? I'm curious. But for the 49ers, I don't think they're looking to replace a Debo Samuel role. I think that role developed over time, but I don't think going into it is like, oh, well, we plan to use him on just screens and end arounds the whole time. Like, nah, like, we want him in route, and he did a lot of those things. So right now, I think it's Ricky Pearsall replaces Debo Samuel, and it's not a Debo Samuel role. It's just, I'm a Z receiver, yep, and Ayuk is the X receiver, and you have a big slot, which, you can call him the Y in Jawan Jennings, because he can kind of line up. He's not a tight end, but he's that big body guy, and he's, physical on those underneath routes, and he had a terrific season as well. But I don't think you're looking to replace Debo Samuel with someone that does Debo Samuel things. And talking to my guy Rich Madrid, we were on social media, kind of going back and forth, and we were talking about concepts and things. I'm like, well, I didn't notice the 49ers did anything different. And Rich was like, well, no, the 49ers, actually, you see Kyle Shanahan, he was kind of molding his offense more to the strengths of Brock Purdy and him being able to throw the ball around more, maybe have a little bit more of a drop back passing game and trying to expand on that. But even a guy like Debo Samuel kind of made that a little bit more difficult. And now you get rid of Debo and you bring somebody else in, and now, hey, we can kind of use this full passing game of what Brock Purdy can be in it, and without someone that potentially is hindering that. So I do see a scenario where the 49ers are like, well, we're not looking to replace Deebo in the sense of his role. We're looking to replace Deebo in the sense of someone who does what he was more coming into the NFL.
Mhm. Next, let's talk Daniel Jeremiah. He's one of the better insiders, draft analysts out there, and he had some thoughts on the 49ers draft, and I wonder if Daniel Jeremiah might have been listening to our Locked On 49ers mock draft episode, Croc. We'll get into that next. All right. Interesting one from Daniel Jeremiah. And he was on a conference call and talked about a number of subjects regarding the NFL draft. And the 49ers came up. And this is the quote. Thank you to Steph Sanchez, who relayed the article and the exact quote here from Daniel Jeremiah. He said about the 49ers, quote, where they're picking at 11, they're going to be able to get a really good player. I'll be curious to see how Mason Graham goes through the spring. As I mentioned, I think his tape is so good, but I'm not sure he's going to totally ace the spring part of it. If you're looking for someone that I think would be just a home run pick for them, to me, it would be Mason Graham. If Mason Graham were to fall to them. If that scenario does not play out, perhaps John Lynch could trade down, and that would be an option for John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan. With a move down the board, Jeremiah identified another defensive tackle, the twitched up Walter Nolen from Ole Miss, as a great scheme fit under defensive coordinator Robert Saleh. Croc, that sounds a lot like the scenarios we talked about in our mock draft episode, where if there was a sort of a high-end player that could potentially fall down, it might be Michigan's defensive tackle Mason Graham. And the reason he might fall is because, maybe he doesn't quite match up to some other players who freak out and go crazy at the combine, and his workouts might just look pretty pedestrian, even though the tape is really good. And he could be someone that kind of slips down toward pick 11, or maybe even just gets up in mild trade up range to the 49ers if they wanted to make a deal, go up 2-3 picks or something like that. And then what did we do in our mock draft? We traded down and drafted Walter Nolen, which is exactly what Daniel Jeremiah said. So Daniel Jeremiah, Croc, we're not on an island. We're not crazy. At least we've got a guy who's pretty smart, knows what he's talking about, worked in NFL's front offices, who's saying some of the same things we are about the 49ers. And I think it's starting to be more and more clear. And this is a good draft for it. The Niners are going to take a defensive tackle, and they're going to take one early. And if pick 43 comes and goes and the 49ers haven't taken a defensive tackle yet, I'll probably be mildly surprised. I'll be pretty darn surprised, actually. And then I will know that they're about to take one at 75. The Niners are going to come away in this draft with a defensive tackle early.
Yeah, that was interesting because, they laid out our example, what we talked about on the pod, very clearly. And we really went over it to a T. We said, because Graham was there. And we were like, oh, okay, we're going to take Graham. Like, he fell to us, which is what he said. Graham could fall to the 49ers. And he fell to us in that mock, and we were like, oh, we'll take him. And I was like, well, Peacock, you went into this saying you wanted to trade back. And you're like, all right, no, we're going to trade back. In a perfect world, we would take him right there in the perfect world. We would take him there. But for exercise purposes, we're going to trade back. We traded back. Nolen was there. Boom. All right, we're taking Walter Nolen. And that's exactly what he said. And 49ers, you have to figure that out. You got to get better up front. You're not going to have Hargraves anymore. And he didn't quite pan out the way you ideally would have liked, especially year two, dealing with the injuries and whatnot. This is a great opportunity for the 49ers to get better there, which they've needed to get better really since, the departure of Eric Armstead. He was a guy that really held it down there. He was a terrific run defender in the box. He was a guy that gave you some, situational pass rush ability to kind of push the pocket up there. And the 49ers are going to definitely be looking for that from one of these guys in the first round. So whether it is Graham, who I think you and I, we both really like, and I'm almost hoping he doesn't test out his world, because if he does, he's going top 5. But if he doesn't, all right, that gives him an opportunity to fall to the 49ers, and the 49ers get a really good football player.
Absolutely. And it doesn't have to be any one player. It's still early. It's February. We're going to go through the combine here next week. And then, there's a lot more to go through. We're going to go grind the tape more. We're going to continue to build our big board, Croc, and we're going to go back through the other prospects we've already watched, and then have a little bit better idea of the rest of the class, and and maybe re-rank some guys, or do some cluster buster episodes as well, and try to find out who we like and who we want. But and you were just talking about off the air how you were having a conversation with someone and you shout him out if you want, but about Armand Mimbo. And remember, he was like one of the first guys we did because he was in Brugler's draft early. And we did Mimbo, who was the Niners' first round pick in Brugler's first mock, and Walter Nolen was their second round pick. And we both independently watched and came back with the same conclusion. Mimbo's good. Walter Nolen's better. And if the Niners were to draft one of them in the first round, it would probably be Walter Nolen for us and Mimbo in the second. Now, I don't think Mimbo's going to get to the second round, but Walter Nolen just has a little bit more of that. And I keep talking about this, and I'm going to harp on it. And our listeners might get annoyed by me, but I'm greedy, man. It's the 11th pick in the draft. The 49ers aren't supposed to be drafting this high. They don't draft this high very often. I don't want Mike McGlinchey. I want to be. McGlinchey was an okay player, right? And Mimbo might be an okay player. I want a star player. Turn 11 into a killer, a guy that wrecks the opposing team's quarterback. Turn him into multiple picks where you can get multiple starters if you're just going to get a guy that's all right, pretty good player, good starting player. Is Mimbo that? Is he someone that's like, oh, Mimbo is going to be like a 10-year stud. We're going to feel about him the way we do about Joe Staley, and we're going to, want to retire his jersey when he's done being the San Francisco 49er. Is Mimbo that, right? Is Josh Simmons that? Is Will Campbell that? I don't know, but I'm greedy with that 11th pick. And even if it's like not a need position, like what if
cornerback?
What if Will Johnson?
I think I just saw, was it Will Johnson mocked to the 49ers?
I've seen him a lot to the 49ers, and I don't think it's more so people are like, oh, they got to get themselves a corner. And there might be some national folks that don't realize how good Renardo Green was as a rookie, and probably don't realize how good Yamador Lenore is. The Niners are fine as their starting corner. But if you're telling me that he's like the next Patrick Surtain, which is who he gets comped to sometimes, take him. You know what I mean? Like, if that's what you can get, we'll be too full at corner, and we'll figure something else in other places, right? If
nobody will be too mad if you draft a guy and he ends up being all pro. Yeah. It's like, well, we should have took defensive tackle. Like, nah, you draft it. More than anything with pick 11, it's about getting a stud.
Yes.
Like, more than anything, more than need, more than any, and you want to get better in those areas. You definitely want to get better in the trenches, offense, defense, all that, and there's other areas I feel like the 49ers can really upgrade at. But more than anything, you want to just get really good football players. A really good, like this guy's a stud. And who is that guy? And if you identify that guy as a cornerback, forget need. Like, throw the need out. Like, you okay, there's other picks. They still got a high second round pick. There's still other opportunities to address those. Again, you hope that the stud that you're identifying is a trench guy, is a tackle, is a defensive tackle, right? Would love that to be the case. But if it's like, well, the guys that we identified as studs, they were drafted top 10, but man, we identified this cornerback as a stud, and he only fell because there were other studs. I feel like you got to take him. And that won't be popular amongst 49er fans, but I think in the moment, I think the 49ers would really like that. And that your secondary, again, I talked about the Cleveland Browns with Denzel Ward and, Greg Newsome and the other kid at Texas A&M. Nobody cares that they invested a lot in their cornerbacks when they're helping guys. Like, they just say, all right, we got these corners, we're playing man, and now Myles Garrett's gonna wreck everybody's offensive line because, well, you guys can't get open versus our guys. That was the 49ers issue. The weather maybe played a part, but when the 49ers lost to the Cleveland Browns, when the Cleveland Browns had their fourth string quarterback in, the corners had the 49ers receivers in just strapped in handcuffs. Mm-hmm. And Myles Garrett and those guys started pushing the 49ers offensive line around. Now, other people may say, well, address the O-line. I would say, well, if the receivers can't get open, it's not going to matter who's on your offensive line.
And that's where you can make need meet value. And that's where the trade portion of it comes in. Like, I want to be doing backflips about the guy that the 49ers have a chance to draft at number 11. If one of those guys falls to you, then that's awesome. But maybe you got to move up a couple spots just to make sure you do get that guy and you do get that stud, that all-pro, the guy you think is going to be an all-pro. Or move down if you get the opportunity. And I don't, it takes two to tango. You can't just, it's not a mock draft simulator. You can't force a team to give you an offer to move up in the draft. But, I have a feeling there's going to be some offers and some players that maybe another team might want to go up and get. And you can utilize the power of that slot to maybe go down. And then you're still adding value to just getting a good player at pick 11. I'm greedy. I want more than just a solid player at 11. I want an all-pro. I want a star player. You got to pull a stud out of the draft, flex that position, that draft position, whether it's going and trading for Myles Garrett or finding your own future all-pro. That I'm greedy. I'm greedy about pick 11, Croc. We got a lot more conversations to go here this offseason. Jed York might be selling part of the team that's valued at what was it, $6 billion or was it $9 billion? Hold on, what was the number? Where is it?
Why do you look at the number? Why would the CEO, owner of the 49ers, why would he trade a part of it? I mean, excuse me, trade. Why would we're talking about all these trades and stuff? Why would he sell part of the 49ers if it's so lucrative? Because it has been. I'm not a businessman, so I don't know why. But.
I'll tell you why. Because he might need a little cash, Croc. And this isn't going to be a controlling, 10% of the team. It's like, have fun with 10% of my 49ers. You don't have a say in what I do with the 49ers still. You just got to pay me 10% of $9 billion. You got to pay me $900 million for 10% of the team, and you still don't get a say. You get to come hang out in the suite sometimes. That's about it. So you can get a suite for cheaper than $900 million. But why would he do that? I have an idea why Jed York would do that. We got to talk about Kyle Shanahan too, where he's at as far as this 49ers build, this 49ers rebuild, and how important this offseason is. We're breaking down more prospects, building the big board. And you know how we do here every day at Locked On 49ers. Subscribe on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcasts. Croc and I back tomorrow. Locked On 49ers.